Hello, listeners, and welcome to Sailing the East podcast. I'm Bela and
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the east coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting individual, we'll try to get them to be a guest on the podcast.
Now, what makes this podcast a little bit unusual is that only one of us sails.
And that would be me, Bela. I've been sailing for over 30 years. Not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the east coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. I've been on a few sailing trips and I'm interested, but I'm really more interested in picking your brain, Bela, and finding out what you know about sailing. So I'm going to ask most of the questions, and you, Bela, will try to answer.
Yeah, Mike, so now we've done, this is our 12th episode, and so you've been exposed a little bit to sailing. And you told me the other day that you had some questions about how a less experienced sailor or a newbie might approach buying their first boat. So let me start that off by picking your brain a little bit in terms of what you think about and how you think about using that boat. Does that sound reasonable?
Oh, it sounds great, Bela. I mean, this is stressful just thinking about investing in a boat, okay? And I think that this seems like this is probably something that a lot of listeners can relate to and might be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on this whole process. So yeah, thanks for taking the time and sitting down with me and kind of helping me walk through this, and we'll see where we wind up.
So one of the questions you want to ask yourself, Mike, is where are you planning to use the boat?
So, for me, I'm not going to be an ocean sailor. I'm just going to, use it here. Day sails, maybe an overnight or two, a couple of nights, mostly on inland waters.
Okay, so by inland waters, you mean a lake, I would assume, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so I think one of the things you might want to do is go to the lake where you're thinking about using the boat and see if you can find some marinas there and walk around those marinas and get a feeling for the types and sizes of boats that exist there. And there's two reasons for that. One is that'll give you an idea for, this type and size of boat that makes sense for that type of body of water. And number two, it'll also give you a feeling for what types and styles of boats there might be a market for, whether you want to buy a used boat or whether you want to buy a new boat and then sell it at some point in time. It's always easier to sell and buy or sell something on a body of water where the boat is, because then it doesn't have to be moved, right? So sort of understanding what the local market is for where you're going to use the boat, I think is a good first step.
It's kind of like checking out the neighborhood before you buy a house?
Yeah, exactly, right? Check out the neighborhood, see what type of houses are there, whether you want to buy a house or build a house, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to have the biggest, most expensive house in the neighborhood, as they say,
yeah.
Right? And the same thing is true for a boat, because it makes it harder to sell. And at some point in time, you're going to want to sell the boat. So... And so you want to sort of understand that a little bit. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
Okay.
And I know there's a lot of sailing magazines and websites and things like this. Is there some basic education that I should do so I kind of know what I'm looking at before I wander around the marina and start to check out the different types of boats and sizes and things like this?
So the challenge there is this would be like walking around the parking lot of a big shopping mall. There's all sorts of sizes and shapes and colors of cars that you will see there, and a marina will be different. It can be very confusing. So I think what you just want to do is you want to sort of walk around and see what appeals to your eye for whatever reasons. Right? But aesthetics is important here. It has elements of buying a car, right? Most cars have 4 doors, 4 tires, a steering wheel, and some seats, right? But there's some that sort of appeal to your eye and others don't. So that's a good place to start. And then I would write down or try to find out what the brand and model of that boat is. and then you can do some research. Right? That's the way that I approach it, right? Is I sort of look at, oh, that one looks nice. And I can't explain to you why I think it looks nice. I just think it looks nice. Right?
Interesting. And then I can take, and maybe even take some photos. People generally don't mind if you take a photo of their boat. Is that true or false?
The other thing that you can do is better than taking a photo, is if there's a person on the boat and you engage in a conversation and say, oh, I really like your boat. It really looks nice. How long have you had it? 95% of those people will invite you aboard to have you take a look at the boat.
Wow. Cool.
So mariners tend to be very sort of engaging and willing to share. And almost everyone is very proud of their boat. So if you sort of express some interest, like I said, chances are they'll invite you on. And it's a great way to sort of have them tell you about it, and weed out sort of, what they like about it. And you can make your own assessment. So I think that's a good place to start, right? Go down to the marina and just sort of try to hang around and engage, right? And that's a good learning point. And then if you identify a couple of brands and models and sizes that you like, then there's a fair number of resources, as you can imagine, on the internet. A lot of bigger brands have owners group forums where there's all sorts of questions that people ask and responses. There's a lot of other information that you can find on the internet. A lot of magazines do reviews of models when they first come out. So here's another good source of information. In many ways, it's like buying a car. There's as much or as little information as you want.
Now, speaking of cars, Bela, my sense is like cars, there's a pretty healthy used market. And obviously there's a price difference between new and used. At this point, it's early in the process. Should I be thinking about, okay, maybe I get a smaller new boat versus maybe something a little bigger that's used? Do I need to be thinking about that, or do I automatically start with a used boat first time out?
So this is one of personal choice. And I think I'd want to go back to thinking about, first we talked about where you're going to use it. Now let's talk about how you're going to use it. Is it something you want to go sailing for 2 or 3 hours on? Or is it something you want to sail and spend the night on it, right? And live on it and sleep on it for several days. So I think you have to answer that question for yourself, because that's going to dictate, again, the size of vessel that you're going to want to buy. So how do you think about that? Do you just think, oh, I'm just going to go sail for 2 or 3 hours? Or do you think, once I learn how to do this, I'd like to go out on the lake and spend 2 or 3 days on it?
Right. And that's exactly what I'm thinking. If we get one and I've done some afternoon sails, and then we go slowly, you work your way up to the full day sail, then you do an overnight, and then, all right, the next thing you know, it's 3 or 4 nights. So, is there a kind of a sweet spot where you can hit all that? Or are you really looking at a couple of different, it's not the same boat, right?
Yes, there are sweet spots. So the other thing I'll interject here is if you have visions at some point in time of saying, you know what, I want to go to the Bahamas at some point in time, or I want to go to Tahiti and sail there, or I want to go to Thailand and sail in Thailand. So in order to do that, you're going to have a certain set of skills. So my point is, you want to think about the end goal as well, not just the intermediate goal. So if you have an end goal of getting to some point, then think about the path that you need to get to that end point. So here again, if you say, I'm just keeping the boat on the lake, I'm just going to go out for sails 3 or 4 hours and that's it, and that's all I want, that's great. That takes you down one path for a boat. If you say, look, eventually I'd like to go charter boats or rent boats, right? Charter is the fancy word for renting a boat in Thailand or in the Bahamas, then, okay, I got to build up a certain set of skills. I need to know how to anchor. I need to know how to cook on a boat. I need to know how to do a whole bunch of things. So then you might want to think about buying a boat that is along that path to get you there. Make sense?
Yeah. So, and maybe at that point you're getting a little bigger boat than you want. Maybe then you definitely go for a used boat so you can get kind of more boat for the money depending on the budget. Yeah.
Right. So used boats typically, if you buy a boat that's let's say 5 to 10 years old, you're probably going to pay somewhere between 50 to 60% of the original price. Yeah. So there's a pretty steep depreciation on boats. Yeah. And it happens in that first 5 to 10 years, as you can imagine. Then it's pretty flat. Right?
Now, is it like a car in that if you get a boat that's 5 years old, you just set aside some money because there's going to be more maintenance? Or is it just random?
Yes and yes. So I would say that even brand new boats, even though they have warranties, most of them will have some challenges, because you have to remember that they're not like cars, right? The boat manufacturers, even the big high volume manufacturers like Beneteau is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, high volume manufacturer. If they probably, I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is they make less than 100,000 sailboats a year, and they're the biggest.
Wow.
Right? So General Motors makes that many cars in a week. So the volumes here are much lower, which means that oftentimes the robustness of parts and systems is not the same as we've come to expect in a car, as an example, right? I mean, cars have gotten really, really good. I would say boats of today are more like the cars of the 50s and 60s, right? Where you had to tinker with them, right?
Interesting.
So new or old, that's going to be a challenge. Now, I will say with an old boat, when you get to the 10-year range, there may be some significant maintenance issues. What's called the standing rigging, which is what holds up the mast, right? So there's these wires that hold up the mast. And again, depending on how you use it and where you use it and the elements, people start saying you got to start thinking about maybe replacing that after 10 years. And that'll run you a little chunk of money, right? Again, the bigger the boat, the more expensive things get. And it's not necessarily linear. So there are some bigger things that you have to sort of think about. So I think the boats that I've bought or have all been used, and that works for me. I'm a tinkerer. I don't mind doing that kind of stuff. And here again, you have to make the decision: is it something that I'm going to fix and repair, or is this something I'm going to hire folks to do? It's just like a car. You can change your own oil in a car. You can take it someplace to get changed. Boats are the same way.
Cool. So this is great. Now let's say, I want to go for a used boat, and I'm following kind of what you said. Get something that is, a little on the more bigger side than what I'm originally anticipating, so I can grow into it a little bit. So that kind of takes me budget-wise from the new to the used side. I've gone to the marina. I've chatted up some boat owners and really gotten a close look at what I want. And I've got it narrowed down to maybe, 3 or 4 different brands and kind of a size range and some features. Yeah. So I kind of have my checklist and my priorities, realizing there will be trade-offs, right? But then what process should I follow once I kind of have an idea of what I might want to focus in on?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And part of it depends upon the size of boat. There is one large website called Yacht World that has hundreds of thousands of boat listings on it. It is fundamentally the place where yacht broker is analogous to real estate agent, right? That they put their listings up there. And that's sort of the big and sole monopoly, if you will. It's not quite a monopoly, but it's the biggest place for sort of searching for used boats. So yachtworld.com. There's a couple of other websites, as you can imagine, sold boats or usedboats.com, or you have to do some Google searches on it, right? But even Craigslist, people buy boats off of Craigslist. So there's lots of different sources. And again, it sort of depends, right? It's a yacht broker is not going to help you and is not interested in selling a boat for a few $1,000s if you're buying a small boat. It's just not worth their while. They're interested in selling boats for, $50,000 and up to get their commission and the work it takes. But I think Yacht World is the kind of go-to place to do research, right? You can see pictures of boats. They have pictures of the insides, the outsides. They have descriptions. You'll start getting a feel for the value and the price for these various different boats. And then what I would do is just go look at a bunch of boats. And that'll help you narrow your search. Because when you see boats, you'll sort of see things that, hey, I like this, I don't like that. This works for me. This doesn't work for me. And I'll tell you how I did it, right? So at first, I sailed on other people's boats. So that's also another great way. Think about finding some friends. Again, you hang out down at the marina. Most marinas have, whenever there's two sailboats out sailing, it's usually a competition. So oftentimes they have Wednesday night or Thursday night races, and there's always boat owners looking for crew. Even if you don't know anything, long as you can follow instructions, right? Oftentimes you can get on a boat and be a crew member on the boat for the Thursday night races. And if they like you, then you can be there every Thursday night. And number one, it's a good way to learn. It's also a good way to meet other sailors, and it's a good way to, be on a boat and sort of understand different things about boats. So I started doing that first. I sailed on other people's boats as crew. Then I bought a pretty simple boat. It was a 22-foot Catalina, which was big enough to spend the night on. And when the kids were small, all four of us would go. It had a little camp stove on it, had a little porta potty, right? And we could go and a cooler, so we could spend 2 or 3 days on it. Pretty simple boat. I think that was less than $10,000. And it was a trailerable boat, so I didn't have to keep it in a marina. And then from there, I got more knowledgeable. I went and chartered boats. Now, I had to get some credentials before I could do that, but I went and chartered a bunch of boats, i.e. rented a bunch of boats. And then I'll tell you, that experience really changed and honed me in on the type of big boat I wanted. Because living on a boat for 5 days, which is what most of these charters are, really gives you a feeling for what the boat is like. Having the one bedroom laid out like this versus the kitchen laid out here or that, right? It's like a house. They can lay them out inside all very different ways. There are a whole bunch of things that helped us zoom in to say, you know what? Here are the things we like. Here are the things we don't like. And then once we had that, after we chartered for numerous years, we then said, okay, we know what we want in a big boat. So when we made the big investment, right, we had the sailing skills and we had the experience to buy what we knew we would like. It's sort of like buying a house, right? Some people start in an apartment, right? And then they sort of work their way up to a starter house, a small house, a bigger one, and a bigger one, and a bigger one. And you learn along the way. You learn what works for you, what the kitchen layout works for you. 2-story, 1-story, right? All those types of things. The boat is identical to that. So anything that you can do to get yourself on a boat and talk to people, I think is helpful.
Great, Bela. This is a great first step. So you've kind of clarified to me what the plan is just walking around the marina, seeing what I like, talking with people, trying to get on the boat itself. That'll give me a kind of a range of what I'm interested in terms of brands and sizes. Then I can go look on Yacht World or one of the other sites to kind of get a sense of what these cost so I can match up budget with expectations so they're reasonable. And then, I love the idea of going and trying to be on a crew and kind of spend some time on some boats or meeting people that I can go out and spend some time with. It seems like a great first couple of steps. You've raised a whole bunch of other questions for me about chartering a boat and things like that, but I think we'll save those for some more episodes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to unpack here, Mike. Mm-hmm. This is a complex process, or can be a complex process. So I think we should wrap this episode up for now. And then I think we'll come back to it at some future time and maybe build a series of these about, buying boats and other topics like this that we can share with our listeners.
Sounds great, Bela. Always great to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and pick your brain, and I learned a lot. Thanks for spending the time with me.
Sure. Thanks for our listeners for listening. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. It's really easy. In your favorite podcasting app, just hit subscribe. And every time a new episode comes out, you'll get a notification. And so signing off from cold and snowy upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Bela, from over here in Münster, Germany. See you next time.